morning and welcome back to Real Estate Live UK, day 4. Our weeks of free-to-attend virtual events run 3 times a year in February, June and October. And so this is our second programme in 2021. Real Estate Live is brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors. And I'd like to offer a particular thank you to InPost UK who are partnering with the session that's about to take place. During Real Estate Live this week, places across the UK are showcasing investment opportunities, and industry-leading experts from the public and private sectors have been discussing new ideas and topical issues relating to property. You can view the full programme of sessions taking place now on our website, realestatelive.co.uk, and I'll let you know about what else is coming up today at the end of this session. Before we begin the panel, I'd just like to remind you, the audience, that you can use Zoom's Q&A feature to ask questions of our panel, and our chair will endeavour to cover as many of those as possible during the hour, so feel free to even start submitting them now. And now I'm really pleased to hand over to our chair for this conversation, Mark Faithfull, who's the editor at Retail Property Analyst. And Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and welcome everyone to this session. I'm a very long-standing retail journalist, and I think if there's one thing that I have covered, perhaps more than anything else over the last 20, 25 years, it's the trials and tribulations of the high street. And I use that phrase advisedly because I think what we have all seen is that there have been so many challenges to the high street over that period of time. And when I look at the different categories of retail that I cover, you know, the shopping centres, retail parks, online retail, the role of social media in retail, they're all interesting topics and they're topics that people are involved in, but nothing is as emotive as the high street. And I think that that's because, you know, people can immediately relate it not just to business, but to their local community, to their local town centres and what they see going on there. Once upon a time, everyone used to be worried about the role of Tesco and its monopolisation, £1 in every 8 being spent in an out-of-town Tesco or largely out-of-town Tesco's, these hypermarkets with big mezzanine levels to shop absolutely everything. Nobody talks about that any longer. In fact, most of those mezzanines are not even there. But what we talk about now is Amazon, we talk about Deliveroo, we talk about all the other new challenges. And of course, in the midst of that, along came a pandemic. And clearly that's had a huge role on local shopping. Now, interestingly, not only a negative one. I think one of the things we probably do have to face up to over the next few months as we really get back to a normal, whenever that might be, whenever Freedom Day might actually turn out to be, is that the high streets are going to be reshaped because there are quite a few familiar names that won't be there any longer. A lot of those will be chains rather than independents, but it's going to be a mix. And I think hopefully, because I'm sure we've all talked about the challenges of what's happened over the last 15 months or so enough, I think today we'll try and talk about opportunities. The main theme of this is sustainability. And when I think about that with high streets, I would think of it in 2 ways. First of all, how do you sustain high streets economically? Clearly, it's not just going to be about retail, it's going to be about all sorts of things. So hopefully right now is an opportunity to actually do something constructive and productive with high streets. And you know, there's been a lot of talk, but not a huge amount of action around the country. So, you know, what do we do to re-engage communities with their local high streets? And secondly, obviously, sustainability in its purest form in terms of economic and environmental impact. Again, an opportunity to perhaps reset, look at the role that high streets can play. You know, one basic thing, the fact that they are local to their community. And so, you know, there needs to be less car driving, there needs to be more pedestrian friendly, but also, you know, about how the buildings are constructed and the other opportunities about making them greener and nicer places to be as well. So lots of things to talk about. So on that note, I will stop talking and hand over to our panel. I should, just before I do that, I should say we really welcome questions from you guys. We've got a little bit of a plan for what we want to talk about initially, but I'll be keeping an eye on the questions and I'll try and get through as many of yours as we can. But, you know, it's great to get lots of participation from people, so I really encourage you to ask questions and I'll fire them off to our panel. Right, so what I'd like to do is make some brief introductions first. So if I can just go around our panel and just get you guys to say who you are and what you do very briefly, and then we'll move on. So Jason, could I start with you?
Yeah, hello. I'm the CEO of InPost UK. We're an out-of-home delivery network with over 2,000 lockers around the UK today. And we really support the first and last mile of delivery and reduce the last mile delivery of couriers going to homes. So we're really trying to push consumers out of their homes back to the high street, picking up their items rather than clogging up the streets with delivery vehicles.
Thank you. And Phil?
Hi everyone, I'm Phil Broadhead. I wear a number of hats today. I'm here on behalf of the Key Cities Network, which is the network of 25 of the most influential cities across the UK. I'm also the deputy leader of BCB Council, which is Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole on the south coast, one of the fastest growing city regions in the UK. And I'm also the deputy chairman of the Conservative Councillors Association, which represents over 7.5 Conservative councillors across the country.
Thank you. Claire, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, morning everybody. I'm Cllr Selby from Kingston University. I'm Enterprise Projects Lead and I run a creative agency out of the university called Studio KT1, and I've just delivered a pop-up shop called Not My Beautiful House.
Okay, well I think more of that later, I think. Olaide.
Good morning, everyone. I work for First Space. I'm a director of partnerships, and we are a mixed-use developer working in major towns and cities, big focus on town centres and high streets. And we're currently developing schemes in Brighton, Bristol, Cambridge, Milton Keynes, and of course in London.
Thank you. And finally, Duncan.
Hello there, Duncan Brown. I'm the Assistant Director of Regeneration and Economic Recovery at Kingston Council. We are one of the smallest London boroughs of the 33 London boroughs, but we are quite densely populated as well. And we have one of the third most popular shopping centre in London after the West End and Westfield in Stratford. So a lot of retail activity going on in Kingston. And it's got a big catchment for the wider southeast region as well.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Well, look, we're going to go to a proper panel discussion in about 15 minutes or so, but I've just got some individual questions to get the debate going. And if I can start with you, Jason, you obviously touched on what you're doing and a little bit about your role on High Street in your introductions. I wonder, it'd be interesting because, obviously delivery has been a huge element of what's happened over the last 15 months, maybe for some reflections upon what you've noticed in retail during the pandemic and as we come out of it, hopefully. And kind of your report, your role in helping that recovery and sustainability agenda.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. I think the first thing we've noticed is just an acceleration in e-commerce. So we've all seen e-commerce growing over the past 20 years. But I think we've taken a 3 to 5 year jump, in a matter of months since the pandemic. I think when I look at people like my parents, they probably shopped a few times a year online, and they've just accelerated now to 5 to 10 times a month. And so we've seen that now across all customer sectors, segments, and I don't think that's coming back. And so that big jump in online shopping has just created new services like payment services like buy now, pay later, instant refunds, instant returns. And so that big jump really for us, means what are we going to do with the high street? How does the high street become relevant given that huge jump? And, from our perspective, I think that means more leisure, more entertainment, more services and amenities that are going to drive consumers. And from our perspective, we believe consumers should be returning and collecting items as well outside of the home, preferably because most people are hopefully going to get out of the houses now, get back to work, start seeing friends. And what we've seen in the past from a delivery perspective, especially as e-commerce is growing, is a huge amount of missed deliveries, huge amount of congestion on the streets. And so where InPost play a big role is in supporting the reduction in last mile delivery of delivery vehicles in a local community. And that's the sort of the changes that we're seeing and how we want to affect the future of delivery. So from our perspective, there's strong environmental push from InPost to reduce the last mile delivery of vehicles coming up and down.
Thank you. Yeah, a bit more abruptly than I was expecting. Then I need to unmute.
No worries at all.
Duncan, actually, I don't live far from Kingston, and as you said, it's traditionally been a very vibrant retail centre and also leisure area. Obviously, you have the river running through it as well. As you're reopening, obviously most of what Kingston offers is able to reopen, and the theatres and some of the other things that are still constrained have about another month to go. what are your sort of hopes for that kind of reopening, full reopening, and what you're seeing now, and also about making Kingston more sustainable? I mean, I know certain areas of it are obviously pedestrianised, but what are there other agendas going on at the moment to try and increase the sustainability?
Yes, no, there are, and we've had quite a strange year, haven't we, in terms of high streets and town centres. I think for Kingston, I'm not sure if we could sort of blueprint ourselves across the nation and the southeast have been a sort of typical town centre. But I think what I noticed and observed was the resilience factor that Kingston did have with those other assets in the town centre beyond retail. So as you mentioned, the river, the public spaces. And what we saw was actually an intensification of those uses, and people still had that desire to socialise and be in those spaces. So whilst, yes, retail did suffer a huge amount, and Kingston Council itself has distributed over £60 million worth of business support packages to our 9,000 businesses, we did still see that desire and that need to be in the town centre and to use those fantastic spaces and the heritage and the river. So what that's actually triggered is a quite a deliberate response, which was already in train, but with all these things during the pandemic, it has been accelerated either for the worse or the better. But I've seen from the council's perspective, we came together with our partners through a new economic recovery task force, both public and private sector, including major retailers, to come up with an investment plan for the town centre, and what we call at the moment a recovery plan. And we are still in the pandemic, of course, but what that has done is start to unlock investment, because people were demanding in their neighbourhoods better spaces and places to enjoy, and the whole experience. And that, as I said, that goes beyond retail. It's sort of all quite mesh now, isn't it, with leisure and social and work and living. So that's triggered a programme of investment over the next 2-3 years. The council's leading on with the Business Improvement District, which are our key partner in unlocking those and realising those, and particularly the Riverside. We're working with John Lewis to reactivate some of their vacant units, putting some new and exciting uses in there. And I'm sure Cllr will talk about her new and exciting use on Fife Road as well. So I think, yes, we do. We've got big gaps in our high street, or the missing teeth around large scale retail format. And that's an ongoing challenge. And unfortunately, fortunately for us, John Lewis, it seems, are staying for the time being, but we will have other big gaps through the Arcadia Group and all their portfolio of retail. So that's the big challenge. We've got big vacant M&S as well that we would like to talk to M&S on around how that can be used, not least in the meantime. So lots going on, and I think it is all to drive a sustainable and diverse town centre. The town centre is over 2,000 years old. It's had many shocks since the 7 Saxon kings. So I think hopefully we'll be able to survive this one, and probably many pandemics as well. So I'm hopeful, but maybe I'm overly opportunistic at times. But yeah, that's a very quick snapshot on what's going on in the Royal Borough of Kingston.
Excellent, thank you. Well, if we can survive Saxon kings, then we can survive a pandemic. That's for sure. Philip, again, I know you're working within an area that's got a very diverse amount of retail. You've obviously got a couple of major shopping locations in Bournemouth and Poole. You've got some very strong retail parks that are sure competing with high streets, and you've got some local high streets. I know you wear a number of different hats. I wonder where you see the role of high street. It's in that sort of economic recovery that hopefully we're going into, and also where sort of Key Cities Network and BCP fit into that.
Yeah, sure. I'll address the Key Cities part first, because many people won't have heard of Key Cities. You'll have heard probably of the bigger cities, the core cities, your London, Birminghams and your Manchesters, and they're really important because of their population and their size. But actually, I think the smaller cities, there's many more of them, and in many ways, I think are the economic life force of the UK. We're nimble, we're reactive, we've got more integrated governance, so we can get a lot more done very quickly. And I think government have recognised this by directing a lot of the levelling up funds, future high street funds and towns funds to those key cities. And because I think we are on the front line and having to deal with this new world that we're living in with some immediacy. And as other speakers have pointed out, we've been talking about the future of the high streets for decades, haven't we? But I do think that now is the opportunity. We've got new ways of working. We've got this transport revolution that's clearly coming through. And I think more importantly, the public now are really getting behind the necessary reset that we'll have to do to our high streets, which I think is giving us some kind of more political capital that we've never really had before as well. There's many ways that we're tackling with it. I mean, on the ground, from a local government point of view, we're the people that have to actually get things done. So we need to look very closely at how we can actually do that. And clearly, the biggest part is investment. We need investment to help redefine our high streets. Government has recognised that. We've had 3.6 billion through the Towns Fund, 830 million through the Future High Streets Fund, and many of the key cities, including ourselves down in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, have benefited from that. But I think it's a bit deeper than that, and we're having a big dialogue with government at the moment about how we can actually help ourselves, because government can't do everything. We don't want to just keep going with the begging bowl to government saying, give us money to regenerate our high streets and do more. Local places kind of want to have control of their own destiny. And as we know, that magic money tree only has so many leaves. So we've got a specific ask at the moment around giving us the power to raise our own finance locally. That's not raising taxes, actually. It's about actually being able to use the assets that a lot of the local areas have, borrowing against them, so that we can actually have real financial control of our own destiny. We've done that here in BCP. We've got a £50 million futures fund that we've created. It's our money to be able to really get going on the ground and being able to do the stuff that we want to do. And, you know, a few of the other panel members have touched upon some of the exciting things that we can do and use the benefit of the opportunity of the pandemic to get on and achieve that redefinition of our high streets. I think front and centre is that they have to be destinations. They've clearly got to be places that people want to dwell in, that they want to spend time in. The sustainability agenda is really important to that as well, because that deals with not just economic sustainability, as you pointed out, Mark, but the green agenda as well. You know, getting more people living in the town centre, being able to get there in a green way. And the big question is, how do we do that? How do we drive it forward? Now, down here in BCP, one of the things that we're doing is we're creating a new urban regeneration company. We've got £2 billion in GDV of projects and assets and regeneration projects that we want to take forward. To do that, you've got to do it in a curated way. You need the experience and the staff and the energy to be able to put into that. Not just to drive those projects forward, but also to try and curate that more strategic plan for the place around how the whole area can redefine the high streets. Because in my area alone, we've got 19 different high streets. And that doesn't need one solution. It needs probably 19 different solutions. And that's everything from towns funds, we've got heritage action zones, we've got public-private partnerships, we've got an empty unit strategy. And actually, I think hopefully we're doing something right, because we were actually featured in the New York Times last week as a place in England that's got lots of different solutions for the high street. So I think the key for us is give us some more financial freedom so that we can do stuff on the ground and be in control of our own destiny. But let's have a bigger strategic thought about how we actually curate our areas and not just be reactive, which is what we've traditionally fallen into in the past.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I know you have got a hugely diverse area around there. And I guess also probably areas that are hoping to benefit from the staycationing that's likely to take place in the UK this year as well. Olaide, Duncan's already alluded to the fact that you're working on an exciting project. Certainly everything I think going forward we're looking at as mixed use, whether that be within individual buildings or within blocks or areas where we'll bring different uses together in order to try and complement and also create destinations. So I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about that and about what you're up to.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we fundamentally believe that all new places we create should be mixed use. The days of creating mono places where people just go somewhere to work or go somewhere to live, we just think, one, fundamentally, that's not how people enjoy living, but also importantly, doesn't help our sustainability agenda at all. So our real focus is on how can we make sure that we are creating vibrant, active places that enable you to live, work, play, socialize, learn, etc., all in one place. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're working across major towns and cities, and in Bristol, Brighton, and London, etc. What we really think those ingredients are to create a successful place is about how do we create places that people are going to live in, and that's a real variety. You know, everything from built to rent, all the way to kind of extra care senior living accommodation, to real engender that sense of intergenerational, which is what we already have in most places that we live in. This is nothing new, but it's actually bringing those together. how do we create some commercial space that enables businesses of all different shapes and sizes to have access to? And how do we create that really important leisure use where people can, come and shop, enjoy themselves, get their hair done? Those real leisure facilities that will really gel places together. And important, the bedrock of all of that is creating communities. How do we make sure that we are supporting communities that live and work and have grown up in those places for many, many, many years? How do we make sure those communities are well supported? So for us, mixed use is fundamental to that. And I think the other reason why we passionately believe in mixed use is that mixed use within kind of major towns and cities is that it really does help us with our big passion, which is around making sure that we're not impacting on the environment. Sustainability, it has become a massive buzzword at the moment, but actually for many years for us is about how do you create walkable, livable places within town centres that almost, by their actual design, they encourage you to walk, to use sustainable modes of transport, and they're designed intentionally to support that. There is no need for us to be putting in car parking spaces when we're delivering schemes that are within minutes of major transport nodes. But actually, we really understand that actually there are families and there are people who do need those. So making sure that we have that support, whether it is car clubs, whether it's car sharing, whether it's greener cars, much better facilities. I've spent time in Bournemouth and I know it's a massive challenge. How do we create new places that support sustainable modes of transport? Similarly in Kingston, we spent lots of time in Kingston looking at opportunities in Kingston, and we know that because of the wider catchment, people do tend to drive into the town centre. But it's about how do we make sure that we make it easier, simpler, and we provide those options to people so that the sustainability options are much more simpler. And I suppose the other thing for us is about when we are working in major town centres, we've got to also look at biodiversity. Cities and towns, unfortunately, have all those big issues that they come with. They do make us unwell. The air quality is poor. So it's about, alongside sustainability, we're really looking at how do we push biodiversity and making sure we're majoring on that to support, to make the place better, but also to make sure that the existing communities are better off as a result of development.
There's a lot to think about. There. I think. Oh, I'm sorry. A lot to think about there. I think as you say. I think mixed use and that sort of sustainability in terms of ease of transport is going to be key to the future of retail and local communities. Claire, one of the things often perhaps not thought about, and again, obviously Kingston is a centre of excellence in terms of education, is the role of education, because first of all, it occupies buildings, it creates people, but often, when they finish their studies, it keeps people there. I know that Kingston's very keen on the entrepreneurial side and trying to keep its students within the city when they finish their studies. So I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about where you see the role of education in this big picture.
Thanks. I think it has a huge role, and Kingston, we sort of looked at a lot of models across the country. So shout outs to Glasgow, Southampton, Sheffield, and other universities in London like LCC, who'd already been trying to do this kind of thing. And we sort of looked at what they were doing. I'm saying they because this is a joint project between the university and then the student union, who have been fantastic to work with. And we just had this idea in our heads of a model of, can we open a shop in a vacant unit which exploits, brings and showcases student work all year round, rather than just a degree show, which are getting cancelled left, right and centre? Can we sell work with an 80-20 split, so the student gets 80% of that sale? We launched a crowdfunder at the end of February. We picked up the keys to the old PC World in Fife Road at the end of March, and we launched in 6 weeks. So we launched a month ago. We've just got the figures back, and we've had 3,400 visitors in that first month. The average spend is £22. Most people are coming in and buying 2 items. So the model works, and it's quite staggering that it works in a pandemic and it works with the high street in the way that it is. But if I can get students paid and reimburse for their work and talent, that's what I'm going to do. So the shop stocks such a range of products. We have candles, we have tie-dye jeans, we have canvases, we have prints, we have cards, we have postcards. We have a sort of panel every few weeks, so the products change all the time. The window displays change all the time. Our new exhibition will come in next week, which is William Morris Wallpaper Man. So it's a response to the William Morris Society's huge archive of works. So the idea is that this is a constantly changing space. The PC world building, obviously we still get people coming in and asking for electronics, which is very fun. We normally let the security card deal with those kind of questions, but I guess it's just about trying something and seeing if it works. And that's very much what me and the team at the Students' Union have done. And we're just delighted that Kingston, obviously we've had support from the Mayor of London and from Duncan and his team and many other sort of stakeholders in the town. So we've been really lucky, but it was just one of those things that you just have to try and do it and see what happens. So that's the story.
Excellent. That sounds really interesting. And I am absolutely convinced that, the future for a lot of high streets is going to be a lot of these kind of micro initiatives that bring different areas of a city or town together and doing lots of little things. And also, I think, the great opportunity to test and trial. And, perhaps some of those students will get the retail bug and be opening their own stores or doing something in the retail world going forward. So if they're successful, once they see that money coming in, they might get the taste for it. I'd like to throw some questions open to the panel. I've got a couple of questions in as well, which we'll deal with very shortly. I said that we're going to be looking at opportunities, and we are. But Jason, if I can start with you, let's sort of deal with where we are right now. Obviously, non-essential stores have been open now for around a month. So I guess from a retail perspective, high streets are relatively back to normal, if I can use that phrase. We're re-emerging into this new landscape. Where do you see the sort of key challenges for the high street at the moment?
Yeah, the key challenges to the high street right now is getting consumers back through the door. I think the old model of the high street, whereby you'd go and find your bargains and go and find shop things to buy and have lots of bags and carrying them home in the evening, has gone. I think the convenience of online shopping has been here to stay for some time and is growing. So really it's about finding relevance. We're seeing more brands going direct to consumers, and what brands want to do is create experiences. And so alongside the other experiences and convenience that the high street is going to give the consumer, we want to see more experiences from a retail perspective. So it might be going into a shop and seeing less stock, but having people to talk to. I mean, if you look at the way Apple created their store, it's a real experience to go there. You can get an Apple product straight away online, but actually you go to the store for the experience. I think we're going to see more and more stores doing this. And I'd hope to see more local stores as well. So you get to speak to your local bicycle specialist or your local musical instrument specialist and build relationships with them. So that's what I'd like to see happening more and more in the future. And you will go to the high street not to carry lots of bags home in the evening, but to actually have that experience.
And presumably you see one of your, if we turn this into opportunities, you see one of your roles in that, people will come in, I guess, for the functionality of collection. But obviously, once you are somewhere, you're much more likely to do something else before you maybe complete that relatively transactional side of things. That's
correct. So as the growth of e-commerce has happened, we've seen the growth of returns, and we've seen a lot more people using our lockers for returns because it takes seconds to use a locker to return an item. I think also to collect an item, we're pushing more retailers now to get consumers to collect items. So rather than, from our perspective, rather than having 50 delivery vans driving around the local community to homes, including the missed deliveries, we can just have one delivery van going to a locker and dropping 50 parcels off. And it's way more environmentally friendly for communities. And actually, it's more convenient for the consumer because you can start to put the collection into your daily routine. So you might have drop off the kids, you might have errands to run, and then you can collect the parcels on your own terms, not having to wait for that delivery driver between the 8 or 10 hour window that they give you.
Thanks very much, Jason. Phil, I'm going to, and I'll go on to Duncan as well after this with a similar question. We just talked about some of those challenges and some of the ways that things like delivery can come and play into that and help sustain people in the high street, and also the sustainability of delivery. Phil, as you touched upon, you have a very, very diverse set of retail locations, if you like, including obviously Bournemouth and Poole is quite major retail destinations, and then some quite rural, almost sort of semi-rural high streets, and quite kind of quaint, old-fashioned English high streets, if you like. Well, in terms of the opportunities, as you said, there are 19 high streets, 19 different solutions, perhaps. But how do you actually enact that? How do you try and take that forward? Because it's obviously a very complex picture.
Yeah, and actually that's the thing that keeps me awake at night, Mark, because in reference to kind of Jason's point, and the challenges, my biggest worry is that we panic too much, and then we rush into change that is the wrong change. I talked earlier on about trying to endeavour to have some kind of curation and strategy around the different areas, and I think that's really important, because I don't think the high streets are dead. They just need a slightly different direction, and I worry sometimes that there's too much of the high streets aren't working, we need to do something entirely different, whereas actually the solution is just we need to think a bit more creatively. Now, how do we do that? That is a big question. I think the whole one-size-fits-all approach is clearly not right, and that's why I talked about the different ways that we're handling it. So you take Poole, which is a more historic part of our city region. We've got a Heritage Action Zone project, which has been partly funded by Natural England. So actually looking at the why do people want to go to Poole? Actually, it's 1,000 years old. It's a really nice place to be. We've got some beautiful buildings. So actually, let's put some investment into bringing those buildings back to life and making it a place that people want to go to there. You then turn to Bournemouth, and actually part of the problem we traditionally have in Bournemouth is our success, quite strangely, because we're already a destination. And so we've relied on that. So last year, at the end of the first lockdown, Bournemouth had the biggest jump in high street footfall again of anywhere in the country. Now that sounds great on paper, doesn't it? But really, that's just because people came there and the high street was an add-on to all of the other things like the beach that we've got. That's not sustainable. That's not all year round. And actually, that's not really looking to what the future of that high street should look like. So within that area, through, as I mentioned, the work that we're doing with the Urban Regeneration Company, working with partners, we're trying to redefine what the high street should be to become a destination in and of itself. And that panic point that I made, I think, is really important. We've all seen the demise, for instance, of the department stores. And I look at colleagues across our key cities network and I talk to them about what's happening with their department stores. And the general feeling is, well, department stores are dead, so we'll let them go and we'll make them into residential apartments or whatever. I'm not absolutely convinced that brand, it's actually dead completely. They just need rethinking. And we're seeing in our town centre in Bournemouth, the former Debenhams store has been taken over by an investor with really deep pockets, which is great to see. And they're absolutely redefining what the department store is. They're taking the profitable bits out of it, like the beauty hall. They're going really hard on that and having a spa as part of it attached to it. They're putting a food hall on the first floor. They're having 3 other restaurants. They're having an art gallery and an event space in it. And they're having some co-working in there as well. And the idea, it will be a regional Poole and a destination in and of itself. So actually, sometimes my biggest concern is what happens if we just give up on parts of our high street. Final point, one of the things we're talking to government about is permitted development. I'm really concerned about the government's permitted development with letting retail units automatically be converted to residential, because you can then see unintended consequences whereby some shops suddenly become apartments and you'll never ever get them back. So how we can curate it is, I think, the biggest challenge we've got, but there's many different tools we've got in the toolbox.
Thank you. And actually, you've led on very neatly. So I might ask a question of you, if it's okay, Duncan, from a question from our audience. So thank you very much for that. And in fact, it was just about that, about the fact that if permitted development allows residential to come in, it's not unusual for people who arrive somewhere which has got an established infrastructure to then start complaining about the infrastructure that they're living next to. Kingston, for example, has got a very vibrant leisure environment, which involves bars and clubs and eventually nightclubs when they're allowed to reopen. How do you stop? Obviously, having residential within a town centre is a good thing because it helps drive a lot of the convenience retail and it keeps places lively. But how do you then stop that stymieing the leisure economy growing because people start complaining about noise or nuisance? Duncan, any thoughts on that side of things?
If I had that answer. No, look, it is very complex, and it's often not that simple, actually, in terms of, so we are at Kingston trying to intentionally increase our residential population, because it's actually quite a low density population in terms of residential, and we see that as directly benefiting the town if we bring more of that in. And we're looking to use the council's own assets, and the council owns 50% of the town centre and multiple low used car parks as well. So we're trying to shift that modal shift away from cars visiting the town. But I think it's difficult. I mean, we are trying to protect all our commercial spaces as best we can with planning legislation, but there's always a way, it seems, to get around that. But I think what we've done lately is produced a vision for the town for the next 15 years, and it talks a lot about the diversification, but the encouragement of commercial, actually. And during lockdown, we saw Unilever's European Global HQ decide to relocate to Kingston, which was a massive shot in the arm for us. So that was a real shot of confidence around we can be a place where commercial can grow, and working with the university and the council's own assets, we can really shape the town and have that balance of residential. But on your point about leisure, from what I've observed is many of our nightclubs have closed down, and Kingston used to be quite well known for the nightclub economy, and that caused a lot of local issues with our residents. And we brought in some quite strict licensing laws, and that was a shame, because I think we went too far the other way. I think we're trying to bring that back a bit now, so you get that balance of people enjoying the evening economy, because the evening economy is so important to the town as well. So we can't sort of have our cake and eat it. So I think, yes, when we have new residents coming in, we've got to make sure the buildings are well designed, and if there are likely problems with antisocial behaviour. But I think we've gone beyond that now. I think the leisure experience is so wide. It includes health and well-being. We're seeing, and Claire, you may want to talk to this, but we're actually seeing a lot of students not behaving the way we used to as students, and many don't drink, and they want to do a whole range of different things. So I do see that that's become much more comprehensive as an experience now, the town centre, including leisure and what people are demanding to do, and it's very experiential as well. And that includes use of technology. So we're looking at ways in which we can bring more technology into the town centre. We have Europe's largest Korean population, and we've got a link up with the city of Seoul, and a lot of their shopping experiences are through VR, virtual reality. And we may trial some of that in the UK context and see where that takes us. So a lot of it's about experimentation for me, and Claire's alluded to that. We've just got to try things out. If they don't work, we'll know quite quickly, but not be afraid to do so, because that is the environment we're in. And we'll have these big gaps in our high street. We will, and some of that will be for residential, but we need to quickly think what else could go in there. And sorry, just finally, I'll plug this. The council has reinvested in its leisure facility and centre in the town, which many other councils across the land are looking to close down because they're not viable assets, particularly lately. But we've made that commitment to invest in the future, because we know our residents want it. We know the wider London catchment in this area wants it. So we're going to go with that. But it's not just leisure, as I said, it will include libraries, it will include health and wellbeing facilities. So it can be viable. And so that's sort of the commitment the council's making at this time for the future.
Thank you. And Claire, as you've been name checked there, perhaps I'll just drop over to you. That's a good point, actually. I mean, you're right. The sort of Gen Zers are made of different stuff to those of us who are not. And, may well do and may well want different things going forward. So I think people probably have a view of the role of students within a town centre or city, Claire. That's obviously changing. And what do you think they're looking for, and also what they bring to towns now?
I mean, I think it's been a really tough year for students. The move to online teaching is obviously nowhere near the same. It takes away a lot of the student experience. The student union have kind of been trying to plan freshers, but not really knowing if it's going to be online or in person or not. So I think I've seen a lot of students kind of change over the year. So I'd say before Christmas, there was kind of exhaustion, and then a bit of fatigue at the beginning of this year. And then a couple of students that I've worked with really closely over the last sort of 3 years completely dropped off the radar, but have now come back. So I think it's really affecting them in a lot of different ways. I remember when we first picked up the keys, and the team that had done all the branding and identity interiors for us, they were almost kind of, they were sort of awestruck, because they firstly hadn't seen those teammates in about a year, and then we're in a completely new space and almost bowled over. And I said to one of them, this is a chance for you to experiment now. You can have the keys, you get on with it. But I think there's still that nervousness of, the unknown. And what I hope we can do with this whole project is give them that confidence to either sell their products, exhibit their work, or showcase their skills. There's a student who is very, very shy in person. He's been doing a lot of our social media, Twitter. He's an incredible illustrator. He does these fantastic illustrations of football players. And I just thought we've got to get some of these in for the Euros, because that will capture sort of a whole different market that we want to sort of bring into the store. So I'm really hoping that his work is going to be up very soon, but it's just about recognizing talent and showcasing it, not just once a year, having this outlet for them the whole time. And although the current premises, we will move out of there at the end of August, we're already speaking with the council and the business improvement district to look at another move on space. So hopefully we will be able to sort of sustain this whole model for at least a year, if not more.
Okay, that's very interesting and encouraging to hear that it's gonna carry on. I've got a question here that perhaps I'll direct towards you, Olaide, and also it touches on some of the other things that some of the panel have been talking about mixed use and about the potential positives and potential negatives. Urban villages, I think perhaps there is a feeling that we're moving back more to that idea. And I mean, certainly anyone who lives in London probably can see quite clearly that culturally it's always been a series of villages rather than one just homogenous mass, other than perhaps the West End. Are we seeing an intention to really get back to that kind of idea, rather than, kind of a branding exercise or saying you're doing something, but really perhaps just skirting around the edges of real change?
I certainly think if you look at how most people moved around during the pandemic, we were almost forced to, and actually people spent a lot of time within a 15-minute radius of where they lived. So people spent more time shopping, on the high street, spent more time when we could do, going into local restaurants, going to local takeaways, etc. So I think definitely that has reinforced the fact that previously you might have jumped in a train and gone 45 minutes out to somewhere else, that actually you had to spend that time locally. And I think certainly that, that's very much our ethos is how do we create places that people can spend 18 hours in. You can work there, you can live there, you can go out in the evenings, they can socialize there. It creates that real activity, and it supports the local economy, helps to strengthen it and to grow it, and it really helps to create that, what those town centres need, which is that vibrancy and activity throughout the day and evening. So absolutely, I think it's more than a branding exercise. I think you do get it banded around a lot, but I think what I said earlier on, the key ingredients of those can't just be one thing. You can't just build a load of homes and expect to create that type of activity and vibrancy that the town centre needs, and addressing the challenges the high street faces is not just about replacing shops with homes. I don't completely disagree with that. It's about putting a number of ingredients into the place that help to create that activity, that supports and grows that local economy, and importantly, that responds to the diverse needs. There was a question on here about culture, and I think that is absolutely critical. Our cultural institutions have had an unbelievably challenging year and are still going to have challenging years to come, because obviously COVID has impacted on resources, on financing and footfall. So actually, for me, culture is such a key part, and it's what gels all of us together. It's what brings us together most of the time. So alongside the homes, the workspaces, the leisure facilities, culture is also a massive component in helping to revitalise our town centres. And I think putting that in genuinely is much more than a branding exercise. It is about creating a proper village that people can live, work, and grow up in for many, many generations to come.
And just a follow on that, one of the things I'm always a little bit conscious of is that, I guess one of the problems we had on the high street was they came, to use an American phrase, cookie cutter. There was a period in the 80s, 90s where if you'd been dropped into a high street without knowing where you were, the retailers there wouldn't have actually identified it because they all became the same. When we see initiatives and things that work, I always get a little bit of a sense that other towns and look at it and go, yes, we'll do that, without necessarily thinking about why it worked in that location and what their location needs. Do you feel like we are moving beyond that, and that towns are now identifying that, maybe they can look at best practice, but they've really got to think about the individual needs of their community rather than just look at a model and try and, kind of just redo it in their own location?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you can't cut and paste what works in Bournemouth and think it's going to work in Kingston. I think you can look at the key ingredients and look at what makes it work, but you've got to localize it and make sure it's relevant. I work in Bristol and Brighton and Cambridge, and they are completely different markets. They have completely different needs. One of our fundamental beliefs is that we shouldn't go down this complete chain approach, because actually the consumer does want some chain. They do want a Nando's and a Tesco sometimes, but also we shouldn't just if we go down that approach, it can be a very lazy approach to kind of how we manage a high street. So I think for us, we work very closely in terms of community engagement, business engagement, understanding what does this location need, what would support the local economy to grow, how do we make sure that we are helping local businesses actually to grow and stay local. And that's all goes into the mix, and it's harder work as a developer. It's harder to kind of find those gems, and you've got to make difficult decisions about how you make money, because it's not, Tesco are definitely going to pay much more than John and Co, who are local grown businesses, and they have a weaker covenant than Tesco. So you've got to make some difficult decisions, but actually it's for the good of the high street. And when you're taking a long-term view about how you want your high street to be and your town centre to be, you can make those difficult decisions in that case. So I completely agree with you. It's not a cookie cutter approach. You can't cut and paste. You've got to really think about what fits and what works well for your town centre today and for the long term.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm conscious that we've talked a lot about community in terms of the sustainability of the high street, or how we sustain them economically as well. Obviously, one of the other elements we're supposed to be talking about today is the environment. Jason, I've got a specific question for you, and then I'll throw this open to the panel on a more general level. In terms of direct delivery or of click and collect, obviously we have urban, suburban and rural locations. Is there a big difference about what we need to do to help those communities and to improve the sustainability of collection and online ordering?
Yeah, well, we're focusing in the UK, starting with the most densely populated urban areas. But where we're most mature is actually in Poland, is where our business was founded. And we've covered the densely populated areas in lockers and have a huge uptake. We've then gone to sort of towns and less dense areas, and we've seen just as much uptake. We're now working in rural areas across Poland, and we're seeing the same uptake. Our lockers are not just for collection and returns, but they're also for posting. And so we often go to towns where post office don't exist and there is no post office, and so we can give them the tools to post items. That helps marketplaces. It helps with the circular economy, with people selling secondhand clothing. So we've seen just as much uptake in rural areas as we have in urban areas. The difference being those around in rural areas, people do tend to drive more because they tend to live further away, whereas in urban areas, people tend to walk. So we see a lot more people walking to our lockers in places like London, Birmingham, Manchester than we would do in Cornwall or parts of Scotland or Wales. You're just on mute, Mark.
Quite right. And we'll go on to the more general side. Where do you see the role of high streets in terms of looking at net zero? And then I'm going to ask the same question to everyone.
So where do I see the role of high streets
in terms of aiming at net zero and genuine environmental sustainability?
Yeah, I think in terms of net zero, the pedestrianisation, the focus on transportation like bicycles, we're seeing a lot more bike deliveries now. I think the more people living in urban areas and towards the high streets just means that you're going to stay more local to your community. I think the changes now with working, less commuting, all of this is going to move towards net zero. And then, of course, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles for delivery is actually quite challenging at the moment. The technology isn't just there, but we've been trialing in Poland electric fleets of vans, and we've actually added a charging point onto some of our lockers so that the vans can charge as they go throughout the day delivering parcels. So we're trialing things. I know a lot of other delivery companies are trialing different things with electric vehicles to really focus on on that target where the country has for 2030. And I think it's the right ambition. And so I think certainly the high street and the changes in how we live will start to move us towards net zero.
Thank you. Phil, same question for you. What role did the high streets play in trying to get down to net zero? I've got a couple of questions people have also talked about in terms of role of public realm, and also about rural people living in rural areas naturally coming into kind of destination centres. And I'm sure, again, obviously that's something you're facing. I've got quite a few questions. If you wouldn't mind being fairly brief, even though I'll ask you a big question, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. No, well, look, net zero is one of the centerpieces of our generation, isn't it? We have to get to grips with it in some way. Actually, this is why I think the pandemic, again, has really helped. We've had a lot of focus in the past on our main high streets, the big ones. And, as Jason and others have said, they've often been about big brands. They've often been the place that people go and do their shopping. That world is dead now, and we have to realise that. We've talked about making our individual high streets destination. What I also love about the pandemic is that people have rediscovered their local high streets. I've talked before about in our area, we've got 19 different high streets. What I'm finding? People are using them more and more and more. I've got a local high street to me. I used to kind of use it. Now, 3 or 4 times a week, I will cycle in there and it's somewhere that I actually want to be. So that reconnecting with our local high streets, I think, is really important, because not just for the economic effect that has, but actually think about that on a net zero sustainability. If people are using their ultra local high streets more, that's great for the community, but it's also really good for the environment as well. Now, the public realm question is really important. You've then got to make sure that they're places that people want to be. That's where government and local government come in. And we're certainly directing a lot of our Futures Fund that I mentioned earlier on about making those individual high streets places that people want to dwell in and spend some time, because they will go there if they want to go there and want to stay there.
Thank you. And Duncan, same sort of question for you in terms of the role of Kingston in terms of being net zero. You also mentioned the fact that even though it's a sort of semi-urban / kind of suburban areas around Kingston, that a lot of people drive in, about trying to change that. And also, this is going to be a big one, but we can do it really quickly, about whether the local council can play a role in trying to make rents more sustainable for more local retailers as well.
Sure. The council's been very active in this area in the last year. Through our economic recovery task force, we've dedicated a whole work stream to green recovery and how we become greener. And obviously, we also declared a climate emergency in 2019. So I just came off a call before this with working with London councils around addressing this whole area and what we will do, working with the mayor and government. So it's massive, but I think I can talk to the things the council have done more recently. We've invested £30 million worth of money into cycling infrastructure and walking infrastructure, and we've connected our high streets and our communities in a much better way. And we saw a massive upswing in use during lockdown from that, and people started to get into that behaviour of using a bike. We've also we're trying to support electric cargo bikes for businesses locally. We're trialling that shortly. We're exploring sub-regionally with Surrey County Council, trying to get the behaviour of businesses to flip to EV as well. And we were exploring some Highways England funding to help do that. It's been done in Leeds. It's been done across a lot of the country, but not in this sort of Greater London and Southeast context. So we're quite interested in how we look at that. We are seeing the private sector begin to invest in that. As has been spoken about. So, and there's a couple of things there. Obviously, that's about trying to achieve our targets around net zero energy sources, i.e. away from fossil fuels, and then real push for air quality. So our communities are demanding it. So very, very active in that area. And I would say the high streets do support a much wider supply chain and catchment. So it does affect right from urban out to rural areas. But it is a challenge in rural areas. I recognise that. And your second question was on affordable rents in the town centre.
Yes, is there anything you can do to help?
Yeah, we have been doing some assistance. Well, obviously, lately we've been distributing government grants into the town centre to help businesses pay for rent. As a landlord, we have been giving rent holidays We are doing direct delivery of spaces now in the town centre, where the whole purpose of us delivering that is to create affordable workspace and commercial space in the town centre, and that's working with John Lewis in some of their units. So in Kingston Town Centre, we are quite active. We want to do that more borough-wide, and we're exploring with our partners like Lidl and others where they have spaces where we could help bring in some subsidy into those spaces, because what we're seeing is the demand for space locally now is so high because of this hybrid way of working. We have something like 30,000 commuters who used to go into town pre-pandemic, and now we're seeing a huge amount of those just staying at home, and what an asset that is in terms of spend power. So trying to enable that as much as we can.
Thank you. Olaide, I mean, I guess obviously having more mixed-use communities is naturally sustainable because you're keeping people in a location. Maybe, I mean, are you doing a lot of work? There's obviously a bit of a trend towards sort of makers, sellers. Is that one of the other things you're kind of looking at, about keeping manufacturing on the same site as where it's being sold? And
very much. We talk about show and share spaces. Actually, if you make it there, you can also show it, and then you can also potentially sell it. So absolutely, creating that circular economy locally is great. The big massive issues in terms of net zero transport, and we are passionate advocates of car-free schemes or car light or completely emission-free schemes. So really challenging ourselves to think about, if we do have to have cars, can we have them as clean as possible? Can we really push sustainable transport to support people to make that choice? And then I mentioned earlier on about really net increasing biodiversity to address some of those air quality issues that are really challenging in our town centres.
Thank you. And Claire, just finally, in terms of education, what role can it play in net zero on the high street, and also about having encouraging the students to be part of the solution rather than the problem?
Well, I guess in taking over the store, we never knew what was actually going to be left there. So we've been super resourceful in terms of what we've built and what we've used that's already there. On the actual day we opened, I found some pallets. Well, it was actually the day before, found some pallets out the back, sprayed them pink, and they are now part of our retail system, because all of our furniture that we commission from the students to make, there's worldwide shortages on cork, board, all kinds of stuff. And as we move into phase 2 and sort of develop the first floor, we'll be very much sort of paring back what the original designs were. So we tried to be super sustainable with everything we've done, and literally pinned things to walls, and sort of, we haven't wanted to produce more things to display what we're actually selling. So we've been really resourceful and sustainable. And students, I think, are fully aware of that. There's a fantastic product designer who's helped us with the build, who's been working down in Devon with Surfers Against Sewage. And he's 3D printing buckets and spades from beachside waste. So there's some, I think students are probably more aware than we are, my age generation anyway. So they're already thinking about doing things sustainably and doing things that don't harm the planet.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, I'm very conscious of the fact that we're pretty much out of time. Hopefully those of you who've asked questions have seen that I've tried to incorporate your input into the questions that we've been asking the panel. So thank you very much for that. We actually got some great responses, which is not uncommon when we talk about the high street. And I think that I feel like talking about Surfers Against Sewage seems to be the perfect way to conclude a discussion about sustainability. I normally ask people for reasons to be cheerful, but I think we've run out of time. So I'm going to say my own. And I think what the panel have really reflected today, it is very much part of that. And I think their diversity of backgrounds has been really useful in terms of all the different ways we're looking at it. But, to me, when I look at the retail market, and I also talk to a lot of landlords, particularly the big shopping centres, I think that no matter how bad things were, there wasn't enough impetus for change. There was still an opportunity for people to just carry on doing the same old thing they were doing, but just with dwindling returns, whether that be financially or in all the other ways that we've been talking about today in terms of sustainability, about community, about actually delivering, the best things that people can have, really. There's one positive thing the pandemic has delivered. It's perhaps the fact that actually things have really come to a head. We've lost lots of retailers that were perhaps not really bringing a lot to the high street any longer. And there's an opportunity for lots of new things to come in. Now, that's not a given, but that's what's going to happen. But there's certainly a great opportunity. And it seems to me when I listen to what the panel have said today, that there's much more of a will to make a real genuine change. And, hopefully we'll look back perhaps at this period 5-10 years from now and see that our vibrant and dynamic high streets, the pandemic was a great catalyst for that. So let's hope that that's the case, because goodness knows it's brought a lot of bad news other than that. So on that note, I'd like to thank, obviously, the panel for an excellent discussion. And I'd like to thank all of you guys for listening in, and also for all your questions. They're very much appreciated. And again, the diversity of the questions really reflect the diversity of the subject. So I'd just like to hand over to Bonnie to finish off. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much to the panel for a really good discussion. Lots of really good ideas and lots of reasons to be cheerful, I think. So, it was a really great start to the day, and thank you to InPost UK for bringing the session to Real Estate Live. Looking ahead, audience, we would be delighted to see you tuning in to some of our other sessions today. Details of what's coming up are coming up on your screen. We have, starting right now, a session with Commonplace, offering some thought-leading ideas about community engagement. And simultaneously, we've got a session on opportunities in the Innovation Court with the UK Innovation Corridor. Then this afternoon at 3 p.m, we've got a really exciting session on how gun communities can create healthy places in a new, different world, which I'm sure may tie into some of the themes from this morning. And finally, this evening, if you're working late or sitting at your desk, we've got Bob Wiley, who'll be exploring the G in ESG. So lots going on today and tomorrow. Thank you all so much for joining this session. As Mark said, really great to have so many questions and so much engagement. And we'll look forward to seeing you again either later today or later in the week.